I think one of the main things that ends up coming out when we do the couples work is that if a person isn't dealing with their own personal integrity and making themselves happy and proud in their life, like if they're not dealing with their own health or their own finances or their own addictions or whatever it is, oftentimes we really like to deflect that and blame the relationship or blame the other person. So really my hottest tip for how to be great in a relationship is maybe it's you to look at yourself and look at where you might be letting yourself down and be empowered by that and excited by that, not feel bad about it, but really get excited about what you can do to bring yourself into more alignment.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. This week is all about love. We're talking to professional coach Laurie Gerber. And in the previous episode, we really dedicated Laurie's knowledge and expertise towards those of you that are single or dating. So if you missed that episode, you want to be sure to check that out. She provides a framework for finding love, which is actually also really helpful in relationships as well, which is why I think listening to the previous episode is helpful if you really want to improve your love life overall. And today we're going deeper with Laurie to get all her tips about how she actually saved her own marriage from the brink of divorce and how we can improve our own relationships by entering into what she calls emotional, spiritual, and physical integrity. She's going to explain what each of those things mean and how you can use them to enhance your own relationships. Her tips are inspiring and empowering. I can't wait to dive into this episode with you. And before we go there, I just want to remind you to support the show. The two ways you can do that: review here on iTunes. It takes 2 seconds and it means the world to me, and it gets the show in front of more people looking to transform their life through self-development, meditation, and yoga. And the second way is to make a purchase on SavannahSpirit.com, an online shop for yoga clothing, healing jewelry, and unique spiritual fair trade gifts. In today's episode, I wanted to highlight their Himalayan salt lamps. They're not only gorgeous, glowing home decor, but they also emit beneficial healing ions into the air that protect you from EMFs. So just search salt lamps on the Savannah Spirit website to learn more, and make sure to use that code podcast30 for 30% off anything your heart desires on Savannah Spirit. All right, now let's dive into our conversation with Laurie. Laurie, thank you so much for coming back on the show and being with us. Savannah family, if you missed Tuesday's episode, Laurie was talking to those of you who are single. So if you're dating right now, or you have friends who are, and you want to give them all of Laurie's amazing insights and tips, make sure to listen to Tuesday's episode. And today we're focusing on tips for those of us that are coupled up, those of us that are in relationships, partnerships, marriages. And Laurie, I know you shared with me that you've been married 20 years with your partner for 25 years, and actually on the brink of divorce, and transformed it and came out of it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's so funny. It was many years ago, and one of the reasons I actually came to Handel Group coaching, but I work with couples now. It's one of my specialties. So I hearken back to it many times because I do believe it happened for a reason. And part of that reason was for me to learn everything I needed to learn so that I could teach and help other couples. Because I do think that being in a relationship with other humans is one of the most powerful spiritual practices there is. And boy, is it challenging. I think it's more challenging than yoga, than asana. But so I think essentially what happened back then was there were patterns in my relationship with my husband that essentially expired. But, I was getting away with being selfish in some ways, and he was getting away with being sort of a chicken in some ways. And we were enabling each other in our bad habits and traits. And it came to a head quite precipitously with 2 young children and not a lot of sleep and, everybody knee deep in career stress. And at a certain point, he just got really fed up with me. And I decided I needed to get help for sure. I realized I could actually lose the relationship. And I hired this coach. Do you want to hear the whole story? Should I give you the whole long story?
Well, I also want to make sure we have time to hear all your tips, but I do want to hear the story.
I'll give you the net. I had never really had a dream for my relationship. right? And Handel loves dreams, right? And I
Right.
realized that my dream was connected intimacy, was actually feeling like we could connect and talk. I had never articulated that. I had never talked about it with him. I had never even thought about it, really. We were just busy checking off the boxes, get married, have kids, careers, blah, 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 coexist. And so my coach told me to sit down and ask him, did he like that dream? Did he know why we didn't have it? Because it was very clear to me we didn't. And it was a very profound moment when I even admitted, right, to my own heart and to his, this is my dream, and asked him vulnerably, why do you think we don't have it? And he did not want to tell me. But I coaxed him enough because I knew I couldn't go back to my coach and say, I got nothing. I said, listen, it's whatever you tell me, I'm going to make good use of, I'm going to appreciate, please don't be scared. And he said, well, let me tell you, okay, I know that you get away with interrupting your friends and they don't mind. But every time I've ever tried to talk to you, I only ever get about 3 sentences in before you change the topic to something that's on your mind. I stopped trying to talk to you years ago. And that's why we don't have intimate, connected communication. And that was like this moment of truth where my whole life flashed before my face. And I could hear my brother being like, you're selfish. And my parents being like, you're kind of self-absorbed. I was like, uh-oh, the chickens have come home to roost because I could not argue. And then I flashed to my wedding where I promised all the people in my life that I would love, honor, and cherish the man who was sitting next to me in this moment, and that I had literally never listened to an entire story that he was trying to tell. And how could I possibly say I was keeping that promise? So that was an incredible reckoning moment where I realized that maybe it's me, as Lauren likes to say, maybe it's me. That was my coach at the time. And I realized maybe it was me. And in that moment, instead of defending myself for not listening to him and not respecting him, I apologized. And I really meant it. And I promised him from then on, I would not interrupt him. And that was many years ago. And I still have a daily promise to not interrupt my husband. And if I do one of his chores, which I do not like to do because remember, I'm selfish. So I do not like doing chores.
Oh, no, I love what you share because I think so many of us don't have a clear vision or a dream for our relationship. And we could all really benefit by writing that dream out and then sharing it with our partner because we might gain some really valuable insights from them about where, as happened to you, they're like, well, we don't have this because this is how you're treating me. Or, it's just a great place or would you recommend that this writing a dream for your relationship, like your ideal marriage and then sharing it with your partner, is that a good place to start for people who want to, even if they're not in trouble, but just get more connected in their marriage or relationship?
When we start coaching anybody, we always have them write their dreams. What's a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 in every area of life, because ultimately we think that's the part of the purpose of life, is to be dreaming, is to be imagining, is to be feeling into your ideal. And how else are you going to get there? It's like programming the GPS, right? We had nothing in the GPS. We were just flailing about trying to deal with kids. You know what I mean? It was such a flail versus a planned ride. And as soon as we started to articulate what we wanted and could feel it in our hearts, it changed everything. And it, of course, drove up everything inconsistent with that. Everything that lacked integrity then was right there between my eyes. The good news about that is that was the truth. That was the real issue, not all the bullshit I thought it was. He's a jock. He doesn't like talking, I tried. He thinks I'm a nag,
And I think a lot of people do have this, Laurie. So how did you get the two of you communicating? Or again, we don't have to talk about you personally because I know you work with so many couples. But I think very often, sometimes it's the woman, sometimes it's not. But one person is more verbal in the relationship. They're more comfortable talking and expressing emotion. And sometimes the other partner is not. And in order to do this work, it seems like both people need to be talking and communicating. How can you pull your partner out of their shell a little bit, so to speak, if they're not so naturally communicative?
Yeah, it really depends. It really depends on the person. I can give some ideas from what I've learned. But it really depends on the person. A lot of people don't speak up because they're scared of the consequences. That was true in my relationship dynamic with my husband, is he was keeping the peace because he wanted to keep the peace. And he was scared what would happen if he told me the truth. So what I had to do was reassure him that it was going to be safe, that I wanted to know that I was going to change. And that took me getting ready, right? I had to be to the point where I was ready to own my stuff and my goodie bag before I could expect that I was going to get a good response out of my husband. When I work with couples, we talk about things on 3 different levels. 1, spiritual integrity, 2, emotional integrity, and 3, physical integrity. And usually different people in the couples have more fluency in some of those and less in others, right? And
are those kind of like the love languages, Laurie, that people talk about? I'm trying to think, like the physical, spiritual.
no, I mean, love language, that's another good point, right? Like you do have to learn to communicate in the way your partner likes to receive communication, right? You have to learn to express love in the ways, feel love in different ways than might be your natural, and also express love in different ways. Like my husband loves to do things for me. And that to me is not how you express love, but I know that that's how he expresses love. So I have learned to interpret his actions as love. And I've also learned to deliver love to him in the ways that he is more interested in receiving it. And vice versa, right? Like he will sit and look me in the eye and listen to what I'm saying, even though I know that his attention span would really prefer to be, doing something physical in that moment, but he knows how important that is to me. So I would put that in the category of emotional integrity, which is caring about the other person's experience and really, taking care of their feelings. So it's not rational, right? Like you can't argue right and wrong about emotions because they just are. So I would put all of the attention on that kind of thing, like speaking in someone's language, quote unquote, into the emotional integrity category. Spiritual integrity is actually about philosophical alignment, like your beliefs and your theories. And oftentimes couples get very upset because they actually think they disagree philosophically, right? Like you think that's okay and I don't. Or like, you think that's okay to raise the kids that way and I don't, or you think that's an okay way to treat me and I don't. And, so one of the first things we do with couples is actually spell out what is the highest ideal. What's the highest ideal with parenting? What's the highest ideal with this relationship? What's the highest ideal with communication? What's the highest ideal with sex? Like what is our purpose? What is our belief system? What are our theories? Do we agree or disagree? Oftentimes we find that couples agree. They did not know they agreed, but they agree. They just haven't sorted out past hurts, come up with a plan to execute on what they agree with.
Right. Or like maybe they agree, but your approach to, how you enforce timeout or whatever is different, but your overall theory is actually the same.
Exactly. And that's really, really a relief to a lot of couples to find out that they agree. They just, they both think we should be working equally to keep the sex hot and keep it alive, but we just have no effing plan, or we just never got over that one time you embarrassed me, right? So we start with spiritual integrity because we want to find out and sometimes there really are irreconcilable differences. There really are just like deep philosophical differences that you are not going to agree on, right? In which case we sometimes help people, break up lovingly. So then you can move to the emotional integrity piece, which is what are the hurts or the wounds that haven't been healed? Like what's in the baggage? What are the grudges? What are the, and that requires doing what we call a laundry list. And we love written assignments. We take a very practical approach in coaching, and we literally have everyone tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about everything they're upset about, holding on to, unresolved. And we have a process of teaching the couple to listen and reflect back what they've heard so that it's deeply understood and felt, and that a person can actually forgive and let go and resolve that hurt. That then paves the way for the possibility of physical integrity, which is what are the structures we can design in our relationship that will change everything. So, for example, in my relationship, not interrupting changed everything. Me doing some chores changes everything, right? My husband giving me alone time every single night at exactly 10 o'clock for a half an hour where I get his undivided attention changed everything. Having sex twice a week changed everything. Getting our kid to sleep through the night and never letting another kid in our bed changed everything. So that for most couples, there's like 10 or 20 practical, physical things that would change everything and never allow it to go back to the hotbed of hurt that it was before.
That's really interesting, the physical integrity, because I do think that there's so many like basic structures we could put in place in our life that would make things flow so much smoother. Are a lot of things that just aren't spoken about. Like, for example, my husband is the one who takes out the trash, right? And he always takes out the trash and I always end up doing the dishes. And, you kind of tend to just fall into these natural gender roles unless you have a plan, unless you talk about it. And I think what you're saying is that it's really good to proactively spell out and talk about what structures you want in place so that just like you avoid resentment and you avoid, can you give like some other practical examples of this for folks that you've seen work for couples?
Well, we literally, just like you said, we go down the list of all of the accountabilities in a relationship, all of them, from sex to communication, to parenting, to who buys the gifts, to who plans the dates, to who handles the insurance, to who handles the car, to how much over the speed limit can you go, to like everything, just like we did with Head, Heart, and Hoo Ha, right? Just like we looked at like, oh, what does it take for this person to be my one? It's the same, like you would never skip over that stuff if you were building a business with someone. You wouldn't go, oh, we'll just decide about who's gonna, deal with the finances later. You would, of course, you would go through every single aspect because that's what a business plan is, right? Where you look at all the different aspects of the business, who's going to be accountable for what, who's going to be in charge of what. And what we say, which is different than a lot of experts, is that person who's accountable for that department is the person who cares more or is better at it. It's not a 50-50 split. It's split by what you care more about and what you're better at. Like my husband's never going to be accountable for my kids' clothing. He doesn't care. He has no aptitude. I'm never going to be accountable for the car or paying the bills. Like it just would be dumb. But it's also dumb to leave it up in the air and not call the ball. Because when you don't call the ball falls on the ground or you bonk heads trying to hit the ball. And that's a very good analogy.
Right. Or I could see how it's like resentment builds because maybe someone's doing the car and doing the finance and doing all this stuff. But if you don't know, like if it's not spelled out that you actually realize that they're doing all these things, like it's like by making an itemized list, you also become aware of what your partner's doing.
It's like a food log, right? Once you start keeping a food log, all of a sudden it's easier to eat healthy. Once you keep a log of all the responsibilities and who's doing what and who's accountable for what, you can't stay asleep. And I remember there was a certain time when we actually did write it all up and I saw the unfairness, right? I saw what I was getting away with. And that really changed my mind and my heart. And I think that's true in a lot of couples. Like if you don't take the time to look, you're not going to see the pattern clearly. And doing it in writing, like in an actual process is hugely different than thinking about it, talking about it, gossiping about it, complaining about it. Is different to see it in black and white.
So would you recommend couples kind of get together one evening? And because again, if we want to focus on, again, our happiness, our spiritual evolution, again, raising consciousness, like all these things we do care about, it's like the household just needs to function smoothly. And like, if that can just get done, like we can focus on all the other things, like our projects, our work, all these other things that want our attention if we get the basics.
Listen, in some couples where there's already a great foundation of emotional integrity and spiritual integrity, you absolutely will win if you go, hey, let's decide on these 5 things. Let's have a meeting. But what I would warn you, all the listeners, is that if there is not a strong foundation of spiritual and emotional integrity and you start to talk about physical, right? Like I nagged my husband all the time about physical stuff. It didn't go well because he was pissed for a long time, right? And not getting to express it and not, you know what I mean? So you can't just go, well, I tried. Like I tried to talk to him about it. A lot of people say they tried to talk about something because the physical integrity is the only thing they can see. It seems like the obvious thing.
Right. And I just want to clarify for the listeners, Laurie, just in case they're confused, like when you say physical integrity, you're not talking about being physical with one another. You're talking about like day-to-day tasks that each of you do in your house or environment.
Right. Like I used to say, like everything would be better if my husband would just talk to me. Right. Like the only thing that's wrong in my house is he doesn't talk to me. How do I get him to talk to me? Right. It was, my coach like rolled her eyes because I was trying to figure out how to get a physical integrity answer when the issue was deeply spiritual and emotional. Right. Like she was like, back up. What's your dream? Like back up from your nagging about the chore. Again, like I said, if there's a strong foundation of spiritual and emotional integrity, you can get away with, let's tweak the physical. Let's tweak how we divide up the labor. Let's make sure you appreciate me every time I do the dishes. Whatever. You can do that if you have a foundation. But in some couples that are listening right now, that foundation is not there. And what they need to do is zoom way back out and go, what's the purpose of this relationship? Why do I care about this relationship? What's my dream for this relationship? What work am I willing to do on myself in this relationship before they can start giving their, demand list or sitting down to a dream conversation with their, make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I think some of the hot button issues for people who are in relationships that maybe we can just touch on quickly in case you have tips you want to share with us are like, one would be, we talked a little bit about housework, but 2 would just be money in general, right? Like how to spend it, how much to spend on certain things. Another is like how to spend your time, I think, right? Like families, in-laws. And then the big other one that comes to mind is, right, of course, like parenting and maybe different styles around that. Are there any tips or things you've seen work well for people around these hot button issues that you want to share with us?
Well, hopefully they follow the tips in Tuesday's podcast about the 3 H's. So hopefully you've chosen wisely and the person that you're with is somewhat compatible with you as it relates to time and money and parenting, since they're such important things. But There are always going to be discrepancies, and some of you may not have necessarily chosen with your eyes wide open. So I do think the idea of actually separately writing your dreams, like separately writing out what's a 10 for you on a scale of 1 to 10, like what's the dream here, and then comparing notes can be a great starting exercise on those. Just to, again, see if you philosophically align, right? We're testing at the highest level, like, are we in alignment? And if not, what's out of alignment? And if it's out of alignment, can we negotiate? If it's in alignment, okay, great. Then we can move on to, do we need to resolve anything from the past? And what do we want to plan for the future? The only thing I would say is with regard to writing a dream, we recommend in Handel, you think about a year from now. So when you're dreaming, you're imagining a year from now, all obstacles removed. You're not fantasizing, wildest dream, grandiosity. You're not like, I win the lottery and then I make $1 million every year. And you're taking where you are right now and you're dreaming a year out. Again, like if all obstacles were removed, if everything was going amazingly, what would that 10 be? So that's an important, point to make about how to quote unquote dream. Because if it's just fantasy and you're comparing fantasies, that's not going to end up leading you to a grounded conversation about, okay, what do we do next?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Tell me a little bit more about this like spiritual component of the relationship. Because I mean, you mentioned it, there's the emotional, the spiritual, and the physical. But, what advice would you have? Because I'm sure some people listening have a very deep yoga or meditation practice, and maybe their partner doesn't, right? Or maybe they consider themselves very spiritual, but maybe their partner doesn't. Is that like, how does one navigate?
Well, it really does go back to what I shared on the last podcast, which is for some people that's important and for some people it isn't. My mother loves spirituality, completely embraces it. And my father is a sworn agnostic / atheist, right? It thinks she's crazy, right? Like they both think the other one is crazy, right? And it works fine. It is not an issue. They did not care, right? It did not invalidate, one did not invalidate the other. One did not need the other one to participate. So it just, for some people, it doesn't matter. For some people, it really does.
And it's good to know yourself and be super clear on that when you're picking your partner, I guess is what you would
I wish. And then if you're, it's very two-headed, like you said, right? Can't people change or can they, right? So I've seen people change and evolve, right? I have definitely become a better person in my marriage. Do I think that someone who's not practicing spirituality could wake up one day and go, you know what? I want to take that on and do that, especially because it makes you happy, honey. Sure, that can happen. It's better if you don't need that to happen in order to be happy. But yeah, it can happen. And if you're trying to get someone to do more of what you want, the best rule of thumb is give them what they want, right? You make sure you're doing great at giving them what they need before you ask for what maybe you think you need, right? That's my best coaching on that.
Right. And I think a concept here that's interesting that I want to make sure we leave people with is that you should be asking your partner for feedback on how you're doing, because it sounds like you were on the brink of divorce. And then all of a sudden, just by having a conversation where all of a sudden your partner was able to give you feedback about what was really bothering them, that ended up saving the marriage.
Yes. And that works in pretty much every relationship too. So that is excellent coaching to highlight and end with.
Yes. Okay. So before we let you go, is there a specific way that you suggest people solicit feedback from their partner? Or is it literally just like out of the blue, like you're just like, hey, honey, tell me, how am I doing as a wife or as a partner, as a husband? Do you have any feedback for me?
It's hard to imagine that a simple line like that would ever be a problem. But again, it depends on the couple. I usually say, share your own experience, share what you're working on before you ever make it seem like you need them to change or do something differently if you want to get a good reception. And again, problem with that question is it can feel like a test or a setup if it's not truly truly from a place of love and peace and wholeness, which is why it can also help to set it up with, hey, I'm working on this. I'm trying to be better. This is what I've come up with. This is my dream. Can I get some feedback? Will usually make someone feel more at ease to give you the feedback rather than just out of the blue.
Right. You don't want them to think you're luring them into a trap.
It can feel scary. Of course it can,
especially if it's the first time you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
Laurie, amazing. Is there any last tips you want to share for listeners who are coupled up, who are in a relationship that we haven't touched on yet?
I think one of the main things that ends up coming out when we do the couples work is that if a person isn't dealing with their own personal integrity and making themselves happy and proud in their life, like if they're not dealing with their own health or their own finances or their own addictions or whatever it is, oftentimes we really like to deflect that and blame the relationship or blame the other person. So really my hottest tip for how to be great in a relationship is, to follow the Handel method, to kind of like to, maybe it's you, to look at yourself and look at where you might be letting yourself down and be empowered by that and excited by that, not feel bad about it, but really get excited about what you can do to bring yourself into more alignment, because that is actually one of the most efficient ways to help relationships get better.
Right. To really do your own self-work. I really agree. I couldn't agree more. Laurie, how can people stay connected with you, find you online?
Excellent question. handelgroup.com.
Yeah. And I think if they go to handelgroup.com/3Hs, and that's just the number 3H and then the letter S, they can get more information on the framework you presented in Tuesday's episode with the 3Hs as it pertains to dating and love.
That's a great idea. It's a free download, actually, of everything you need to know about the 3Hs. And so, yeah, you should absolutely get that. That is a no-brainer.
Perfect. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for coming on the show. Listeners, make sure to let me know what you thought of this week's guest and these 2 episodes, whether you're single or coupled up. Remember, your ratings and reviews here on iTunes really help support the show, get it in front of more people looking to elevate their consciousness, improve their life through yoga and meditation and self-development. It really does make a difference. So take a moment to leave a rating or review here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show. I hope you feel inspired, that your heart feels full, that you're going to take some of these tips from this week's episode out into your daily life. So much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.